The thing that eventually got me to say something wasn't the pattern itself. It was that I noticed the pattern and then didn't say anything for almost 3 weeks. I worked the cage at a mid-tier property off the north end of the strip, February 2021, when the floors were half empty and everyone still wore masks under their chins. My window faced the roulette pit and part of the high-limit slots. Rita worked the window to my right. On my left, some nights was a guy we called Pep because he drank 3 Pepsis a shift and pretended his manager didn't notice. The man in the hoodie showed up in early November, but I only clocked him around Thanksgiving. Late 40s, maybe 50, gray zip-up hoodie, always. Black baseball cap, no logo, jeans that fit like he'd owned them a long time. He'd walk in at 4:15 in the afternoon, plus or minus a minute. Not 4:14, not 4:20. I could set my brakes around him, and I did. He'd cash in $800 in 20s, always 800. Always with me if my line was open, or with Rita if it wasn't. He'd take the chips to the same electronic roulette terminal near the back wall, and he'd play for about an hour and 10 minutes. Then he'd come back and cash out, $2,347.63. That number never changed. The first time it caught me was maybe the 4th or 5th cash out. You'd expect an even number, or at least something that ended in a 5. The 63 cents was what stuck. Roulette payouts land on odd totals sometimes, sure, but not the exact same odd total 2 days in a row, and then 3, and then a week. I mentioned it to Rita on a smoke breakout by the loading dock. She was scraping polish off her thumbnail and half listening. "He's counting cards or something," she said. "You can't count cards on roulette." "Then he's lucky. Every day, to the cent." She looked up then. "Every day?" "Every day for like 3 weeks." She thought about it for maybe 5 seconds, shrugged, and said something about how weirder stuff walks in every Tuesday, and she wasn't wrong, but that was the first time I said it out loud, and once you say a thing out loud, you start hearing it back. I began writing the number down on the back of my drawer receipt each night. 234763, 234763. I did it more for my own sanity than as evidence. I felt stupid about it. I still have those receipts somewhere in a shoebox. By Christmas, it was more than 2 months of the same cash out. He never won more. He never won less. He never had a bad day where he broke even and left frustrated. He didn't drink at the terminal. He didn't tip me, not once. And he didn't tip the cocktail girls either. He said thank you in a soft voice both times, coming in and going out, and that was all he said, ever. The strangest part wasn't the amount. It was how ordinary he looked doing it. Nobody walking past that terminal would have picked him out. Around the second week of January, I did something I probably wasn't supposed to do. I have a cousin in surveillance, second cousin really, and I asked him to pull up the man's terminal from 3 random days I gave him. December 3rd, December 19th, January 6th. I told him I thought the guy was working with a dealer, which was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that gets you help instead of questions. We watched the 3 sessions side by side on his monitor in the little back room off the eye. 3 different afternoons. 3 different sets of numbers spinning on the graph on the terminal screen. He bet differently each time. Sometimes he played the outside, red, black, odd even. Sometimes he'd sit on a corner for 20 minutes and then jump to a straight-up number. On December 19th, he lost 11 spins in a row, and I could see my cousin lean forward because it looked like the guy was finally going to go home broke. He didn't. He recovered on the 12th spin, straight up 17, and by the end of the session, he cashed out at exactly the same total. My cousin sat back and rubbed his eyes and said, "That's not a system. A system loses sometimes." I asked him what it was then. He didn't answer for a while. Then he said, "I don't know, but I wouldn't watch any more of these on my login." I went home that night and slept badly. Not from fear, exactly. More like the feeling of standing next to something you can see moving but can't name. The next afternoon at 4:15 he came in, and I counted out his 820s, and my hands were fine and my voice was fine, and he said thank you in the same soft voice, and I decided I was going to tell my shift manager the next morning. Denise had been in the industry since the 80s and had the flat, patient face of someone who had heard everything. I brought her my stack of receipts and told her the whole thing in about 4 minutes without stopping. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "You're sure about the cents?" "Every day. 63 cents. "For how long?" "Since November. That I noticed." She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't tell me I was tired. She picked up her desk phone and made a call to somebody upstairs and used my name and said the words, "Possible cage anomaly." And then she hung up and told me to go work my shift and not to say anything to anyone, including Rita. 3 days later, 2 men in decent suits met me in a conference room I hadn't known existed on the second floor. One was from the property's compliance side. The other was from the parent company's financial security team out of Reno. They had already pulled the terminal logs, the cash-in records from my drawer and Rita's, and a printout of every session the guy had played, laid out on the table like a deck of cards. The one from Reno asked me what I noticed first. I told him the 63 cents. He nodded like that was the answer he'd expected, and slid a piece of paper across. It was a graph. I didn't understand most of it. What I did understand was that there were 2 lines on it, and they moved together in a way that made no sense for a random game. He tapped the second line with his pen and said it was the aggregate action on that same terminal type across 4 other properties in the same corporate group. When our guy played, the payouts on those other terminals shifted, very slightly, in a way that fed his outcome. I asked how that was possible. He said, "It shouldn't be." Then he said, "Who else did you tell about this?" I said, "Just Denise, and my cousin in surveillance." The compliance guy wrote both names down and left the room and didn't come back that afternoon. For about a week, the property was quiet, in the way places get quiet when you're not supposed to notice they're quiet. Cameras were repositioned. A crew came in overnight and did something to the electronic roulette terminals, one at a time, with the machines pulled halfway out and a laptop plugged into the back. I heard the words federal and civil in the same sentence in the break room once, from Denise talking to somebody I didn't recognize, and then she saw me and closed the door. He came in on a Tuesday and again on a Wednesday, and I cashed him in both times because I'd been told to act completely normal. On Thursday, he didn't come. Friday, he didn't come. The following Monday, one of the compliance people asked me to come look at some footage. They wanted me to identify him from a still. I sat down at the monitor and they queued up the previous Wednesday, 4:15 in the afternoon, the last day I'd seen him. The clip played. I watched myself count out 820s to nobody. My hands moved through the routine. My mouth said thank you. My eyes tracked something that wasn't on the video. There was no man at my window. There was no man walking toward the terminal. The terminal, when they pulled its feed, played its full session by itself, spins and bets, and a final cash-out ticket printing into an empty tray. I told them I remembered him being there. They said they believed me. They asked me not to talk about any of it. 2 agents came in from the Vegas FBI field office the week after. They interviewed me for about 40 minutes in the same second-floor room. Most of their questions were about my cousin and about whether anyone had ever offered me money to look the other way, which nobody had. They were polite. They didn't tell me anything. By the end of February, the terminals had all been swapped for a different model. Denise was moved to another property in the group, quietly, with a small promotion. My cousin was let go, and when I called him, he said it was fine. He'd been thinking about leaving anyway, and he didn't want to talk about it on the phone. We haven't really talked since. Nobody ever put anything in the paper. I looked. No press release, no regulatory notice I could find on the State Gaming Board's site, nothing. As far as the public record is concerned, none of it happened. I still work the cage. Different property now, on the south end. Every so often, around 4:15 in the afternoon, I catch myself looking up at the line, checking the faces. I don't know what I'm expecting to see. A gray hoodie, probably. A soft voice saying thank you to somebody who isn't actually there. I worked the overnight at a regional history museum in Richmond from late 2019 through most of 2021, and there's one stretch from that job I still can't fully explain. This is about that. The building sits off Broad Street. 3 floors, brick, one of those places that used to be a bank or a mercantile before the state bought it in the 80s. First floor is Civil War stuff, mostly. Second is Colonial and Revolution. Third is what they call the Piedmont Wing, agriculture and industry, and it's the least visited part of the museum. Half the time, on day shift, the 3rd floor doesn't even have a guard posted. It just gets swept every couple hours. Overnight is different. Overnight is me and a radio and a laptop that shows 16 camera feeds in a 4x4 grid. I sit in a small office off the loading dock. I do a physical walkthrough every 90 minutes. Between walkthroughs I read, or I watch something with headphones in. The pay was fine for what it was. The thing started in October of 2020, I think. Maybe late September. Motion trigger on camera 11, which covers a hallway on the 3rd floor between the Piedmont Wing and a storage room. Just a red box popping up on the feed. When I switched to full screen, I didn't see anything. Empty hallway. Fluorescence on the night setting. Half brightness. I walked up there. Nothing. No open doors, no windows cracked. The HVAC hadn't kicked on. I logged it as a false trigger and moved on. Old building, old wiring, old cameras. That was the whole answer for a while. It happened again about 3 weeks later. Same camera, same hallway. Around 2:40 in the morning, give or take. I remember checking the timestamp because I'd just come back from a walk and I was halfway into a sandwich. Same thing, empty. I stood at the end of the hallway for maybe 5 minutes with my flashlight off, listening. There's a specific sound to that floor at night, this low hum from the climate control cabinet at the far end, and a soft creak from the wood every so often as the building settles. Nothing that shouldn't have been there. I called the day supervisor about it the next morning, a guy named Doug, who'd been at the museum for close to 20 years. He said the third floor was famous for it. Cameras up there had been throwing false triggers since before they upgraded the system in 2016. He asked if I wanted maintenance to look at it, and I said no, don't bother, I just wanted it on record. That's the part I keep coming back to, that I said don't bother. Third time was in November, fourth was 2 weeks after that. By December I could almost feel it coming. The trigger always hit between 215 and 250, always camera 11, never any of the others, not the two in the Piedmont wing itself, not the one at the stairwell, just the hallway. And every time when I went up, there was nothing there. Not a smell, not a temperature change, not a piece of anything out of place. I want to be honest here, I didn't take it seriously enough. It felt like a quirk of the building. I stopped even calling it in after the third one. I'd note it in my shift log, walk up, glance around, come back down. Sometimes I didn't do the full walk. I'd get to the top of the stairs, shine my flashlight down the hall, see the empty floor and the closed display cases, and turn around. The Piedmont wing itself is not what you'd call rich. There's a section on tobacco farming, one on the old railroads, one on the early textile mills. A lot of tools, some old photographs, some ledgers under glass. In the middle of the room, there's a big case with maps, land surveys, county maps, some hand-drawn stuff from the 1700s and 1800s. The showpiece is a map from 1791 showing a stretch of the James River and some property lines that don't exist anymore. It has a little brass placard next to it. I'd walked past that case 100 times. The night I noticed was December 19th, a Saturday going into Sunday. Trigger came at 2:33. I remember because I'd just gotten a text from my sister, and I looked at my phone at the same time the alert popped. I finished the text. I went up. Everything looked normal in the hallway. I did the full walk this time, mostly out of guilt, because I hadn't done it properly in weeks. Storage room, locked. Utility closet, locked. Piedmont wing, dark except for the low emergency lights along the baseboards. I walked the perimeter. Ledger case, fine. Tool wall, fine. I got to the map case in the middle and I stopped. I don't know what made me stop. The case was closed. The glass was intact. The map was in the same position it had always been in, under the same little brass label. But something about it wasn't sitting right. I stared at it for probably a full minute before I figured out what was bothering me. The paper looked wrong. The original had this yellowed, brittle quality to it and a crease down the left third, where it had been folded for a long time before it got framed. The one in the case that night had a crease too, but it was in a slightly different spot, not by much, maybe an inch, and the color was off. Not by a lot, but the yellow was more even, less blotchy, like someone had done it deliberately instead of it happening over 200 years. I stood there with my flashlight on it for a long time. I told myself I was being stupid. I hadn't looked closely at that map in months. Memory plays tricks on you at 3 in the morning in an empty building. I was going to walk out of there feeling ridiculous. Then I saw the marks. Down in the lower right of the map, close to where the James bends south, there were 4 small pencil marks, little X's. Not on the original, I was sure of that, because that map had been photographed in high resolution for the museum's website, and I'd looked at it on my phone once out of boredom. There were no pencil marks on it. There were numbers next to 2 of the X's. I couldn't read them clearly through the glass. I did not touch the case. I went downstairs. I sat in the office and I watched the feed from camera 11 for the rest of my shift. Nothing moved, nobody came out. When Doug came in at 7, I met him in the parking lot before he was even out of his truck. He thought I was messing with him at first. Then he saw my face and he went straight upstairs with me, still in his coat. He looked at the map for maybe 10 seconds and said, "That's not our paper." I want to skip ahead a little because the rest happened in daylight and it's less interesting to describe. They pulled the map that afternoon. The director came in on a Sunday, which she never did. A conservator from the state came Monday morning. By Monday night, we had confirmation. The map in the case was a forgery. Good work, apparently. Good enough that if I hadn't been standing 3 feet from it with a flashlight, I might never have caught it. The paper had been artificially aged. The ink was close, but not right. The frame and the glass were ours. The map wasn't. The original was gone. Nobody has any idea where. The 4 pencil marks were coordinates. That took a couple more days to work out because whoever did it hadn't written them out cleanly, just the last digits, and you had to know the general area to fill in the rest. 2 of them were on private land, one was somewhere out near the Blue Ridge, and one was a spot about 40 minutes west of the city, near a state forest access road. That last one is the one they checked first. I don't know exactly what they found. I know it was a small waterproof case, buried, and I know it contained documents. I know the phrase, "part of the '94 loss," got used in front of me by someone from the state, and I know that a chunk of the historical archive had been stolen in the mid-'90s and never fully recovered. That's public information if you dig for it. What was in the case specifically, I was never told, and I didn't push. The other 3 locations, as far as I know, were never dug up. Or if they were, nobody told me. The camera on the 3rd floor kept throwing motion triggers for about another month, and then it stopped. Just stopped. Never happened again the rest of the time I worked there. They went over the building twice looking for how anyone was getting in. No broken seals on the doors, no prints on the case, no sign of tampering on the alarm system, nothing on any of the other cameras, ever, on any of those nights, at any of those times. Just camera 11, just the hallway, just the empty floor. I quit in the summer of 2021 for unrelated reasons. Doug still works there. The map case has a different map in it now, a less valuable one. The 1791 is officially listed as under conservation, which I think is just what they say when they don't want to admit it's gone. I've thought about it a lot, obviously. Whoever it was, they weren't there to take. They were there to leave something. The whole thing, the swap and the marks and whatever was in that case in the woods. It was somebody finishing a job that started before I was even born, and they walked past camera 11 every 3 weeks for months while I ate sandwiches downstairs and marked it in the log as a glitch. That's what actually bothers me about it. Not the map, not the coordinates. The fact that they walked past that camera on purpose. They wanted me to see them coming. And I did see them, in the small red box in the corner of my screen, and I decided every time that it was nothing. The thing that stuck with me about that case wasn't the missing kid. It was the invoice. We found it later, taped to the inside of a filing cabinet in a warehouse off Holabird Avenue, and it was formatted like something you'd get from a plumber. Line items, hourly rate, a note at the bottom that said, "Thank you for your business." My partner Ray read it twice and then just handed it to me without saying anything, but I'm getting ahead of myself. October 2021, the case came in as a missing person, which is not usually where I live. Homicide gets called when a body turns up or when missing persons has been chewing on something for a while and it starts to smell wrong. This one smelled wrong from day 2. A 26-year-old guy named Dennis worked in payroll for a construction outfit in Highlandtown, walked out of a bar on a Thursday and never came home. No withdrawals, no phone pings, no plate hits on the tolls. His car was still in the lot behind the bar with an unfinished cigarette in the ashtray. His girlfriend told us Dennis had been nervous for about a month. Said he'd found something at work he wasn't supposed to find. Wouldn't say what. Told her if anything happened to him, she should call the FBI, not the local cops. That's a hell of a thing to say to your girlfriend. Ray drove. I don't like driving in Baltimore. Ray liked driving anywhere. He had a coffee cup wedged into the vent because the cup holder was broken, and every time he braked, coffee slopped onto the dashboard. The car smelled like burnt sugar all week. We started with the construction company. Nothing. Books looked clean, or at least clean enough that we weren't going to get past them without a warrant we didn't have grounds for yet. But one of the office women, I'll just call her M, pulled Ray aside on the way out and asked him if we were the ones about Dennis. Ray said yeah. She said Dennis had been on the phone in the parking lot the week before he vanished, and she'd overheard him say the words commercial disposal. That's a weird phrase to say into a phone. We ran it. Nothing on the state business registry that fit. Then Ray had the idea to check the classifieds in the back of a couple of trade papers, the kind of thing that gets left in truck stops, and there it was. A quarter-page ad for a company that called itself Meridian Recovery Solutions. The pitch was document destruction, secure asset disposition, chain of custody guaranteed, an address in the industrial belt south of the harbor, a phone number that rang to a voicemail with no company name on the greeting. Ray looked at me. That's a lot of language for shredding paper. We didn't go in. We sat on it. For 8 days we ran surveillance on the address, which was a corrugated metal building with a loading bay and a small office door. It sat between a paint distributor and a place that repaired forklifts. No sign out front. There was a black F-25. Oh, that showed up every morning at 7 and left at 4, and a guy in a Carhartt jacket who unlocked the office door and locked it behind him. Middle-aged, average build, glasses. The kind of guy you'd stand behind in line at a hardware store and never think about again. Other vehicles came and went. A minivan, a landscaping truck, once an ambulance, which is what pushed us to finally get a warrant. Ray called it in on the 4th day, and I remember he laughed once, dry, and said either they were running a body farm or somebody's mom died and they were cleaning out the house. Turned out to be neither. We got the warrant on a Tuesday. Ray took the front. I took the loading bay with 2 uniforms. The Carhartt guy opened the office door and looked at us like we were the plumber he'd forgotten he called. No panic. He just stepped back and said, "You'll want to see the ledger." That was his first sentence to us. You'll want to see the ledger. Inside it was clean. Not sterile, but clean. Concrete floor painted gray. Industrial shredder along one wall, the kind that eats hard drives. A furnace at the back, gas, with a chimney that vented through the roof. 2 rolling carts, a pegboard with tools hung in outlines, like a mechanic's shop, and a filing cabinet. The invoice I mentioned was in that cabinet. They kept records. That was the thing that changed the case. They kept records because they weren't the criminals. They were, the way the Carhartt guy explained it later, a service. Clients brought them things. They destroyed the things. They billed for it. They paid taxes on it. They had a business license from the state of Maryland that said Industrial Waste Consulting, and it was technically not a lie, if you squinted. The ledger listed 6 active accounts. 6. I sat on the floor of that office with my back against the filing cabinet and read the ledger for maybe 20 minutes while Ray photographed everything. The entries were coded, initials only, but there were dates and there were descriptions. 2 boxes, paper, priority. 1 duffel, mixed, hazmat protocol. Vehicle interior, full detail, no reassembly. That last one is a sentence I still turn over in my head sometimes when I can't sleep. One of the entries from 3 weeks earlier said, 1 unit, biological, complete. Dennis. It had to be Dennis. There was no name, but the timing lined up with when he disappeared, and the account initials matched a shell company that traced back, eventually, to a vice president at the construction firm in Highlandtown. Dennis had found the money, and somebody had called Meridian. That night, Ray and I sat in the car outside my apartment for about 40 minutes, and neither of us wanted to go inside. He had a cigarette going, which he wasn't supposed to have, because his wife had made him quit in the spring. I didn't say anything about it. He said, "We've got 6 clients." I said, "Yeah." He said, "How many of them know we hit the shop today?" That was the question. I went to the prosecutor the next morning, a guy I'll call D. Good lawyer, ambitious, careful in court, and impatient out of it. I laid out what we had. I told him the play was to keep Meridian running. Wire the place. Let clients keep bringing their work. Every duffel that came through that door was a case file we didn't have yet. Every invoice was probable cause on somebody we hadn't identified. I said if we moved slow, we could clear a dozen open homicides in a year. Maybe more. He listened, he nodded in the right places, and then he told me the arrests would happen inside the week. I argued. I was not quiet about it. Ray stood in the corner of D.S office and studied his shoes. D told me the political exposure of running an active evidence destruction operation as a sting was more than his office could carry, and if it leaked, and these things always leak, we'd be the people who let contract cleaners keep working while we watched. I said we would also be the people who caught the 6 men who hired them. He said the answer was no. They moved on a Friday. Meridian folded on the first knock. The Carhartt guy, whose name I'm not going to put here because he ended up cooperating, walked us through everything he could remember. He gave us his client list, and it lined up with the ledger. 6 names. Warrants went out that afternoon. 2 of the 6 had gotten a phone call the night before. I don't know who from. The leak could have been anywhere. That's the thing about a fast arrest. The circle of people who know is already wide by the time you kick the door. One of those 2 had a garage full of things that were not in the garage anymore by the time we got there. Bleach smell, fresh concrete in one corner of the floor. The other one had a boat. The boat had recently been cleaned. Very recently. The Coast Guard walked it for us and found nothing, which is exactly what you find on a boat that has been cleaned by someone who knows what they're doing. The other 3 we got clean. One of them cracked an interview inside of 2 hours and gave us 3 more names attached to 2 more open files. The other 2 are still in the system, still working through appeals. They'll do time. Dennis's family got a funeral without a body. His girlfriend brought me a card at the precinct about a month after the arrests. She thanked me. I put it in my desk drawer, and I did not read it again for a long time. Sometimes I run the math in my head. If we'd waited 3 more months, if we'd waited 6, how many duffels would have come through that door? How many families would have gotten a body instead of a boat that smelled like bleach? D is a judge now. He doesn't remember the case the way I remember it, I think. Or he does, and he doesn't want to. The invoice is in an evidence box in a warehouse somewhere in the county. Line items, hourly rate. Thank you for your business. Alright guys, thanks for watching this one. I want to know which 4chan story you like the most, so leave it down below in the comments. And if you're still in the mood for more scary stories, go check out the other vids on the channel. See you soon. Bye.